Now, we're going to take milk fat and we're going to take milk protein, because I was supposed to talk about components. No point in talking about lactose because that's pretty clear. Randy covered it. I've already covered it. Why low milk fat? Do we like low milk fat? Well, generally not. We don't, because it hurts on the milk check. Now, why do we get low milk fat? Well, years ago we said the reason was what? Overfeeding grain, underfeeding forage. And we believe that ever since I was a kid, and I think my dad believed it, and his granddad probably believed it. But you know what? The research really didn't support it very. Oh yeah, if we fed high grain, low forage diets, we got low milk fat. But we could never explain why. We could never explain why. Well, now we got a little bit smart, and some people at Cornell University, Dale Ballman and some others said, you know, they kept scratching their head for 20, 30 years. Like, something else is going on. Well, lo and behold, something else was going on. Because with the more modern day dairy cow and how we've been feeding dairy cows, sometimes we get depressions in milk fat and we say, what is going on? The cows even seem healthy. We're not getting laminitis necessarily, but we're getting low milk fat. What is going on? Well, you look back, part of it, you know, as we look back, we say that's kind of related to start feeding more and more byproducts. Our gluten feeds and our DDGSs and stuff like that. You know, is there some connection there? And that's really what stimulated the interest. But then we realized, no, there are some specific fatty acids that sometimes get produced in the rumen that will cause that milk fat depression. Doesn't necessarily just have to do with high concentrate, low forage diets. And what they found is that the rumen doesn't have to produce very many of these really very rare specific fatty acids. Only 1.5 grams, 2 grams, or maybe as much as 3 grams. That's all that's needed to really depress milk fat. You say, wow, these things must be really potent. Well, they are really potent. And there are different reasons why these different fatty acids are produced. And I'm not going to take long on this because this is really complicated. I've only got a couple slides, so bear with me on it. But if you think about forages, and you folks have your forages analyzed, right? You send them into commercial feed testing lab, and the ether extracts or the fats come back where? 2%, 2.5%, something like that. And it's going to depend if it's corn silage or haylage or your haze. But every feed that you send into a commercial feed testing lab is going to have fat in it. Well, those are all plant fats. And what do we know about plant fats as compared to animal fats? Are they more oily or are they more solid? They're more oily, aren't they? They're oily. They run like corn oil, like soybean oil, like olive oil. You put it in a bottle. It's not like lard. It's not like butter, which is an animal fat. Anybody know what the difference is between a fat that is liquid at room temperature and one that's solid at room temperature? What's the difference? Yeah, those that are solid at room temperature, like butter, most of the fatty acids are what we call saturated fatty acids. Those that pour like a liquid are have a very high concentration of unsaturated fatty acids. Meaning, and the only difference is, the unsaturated fatty acids have some double bonds in their chemical structure. 1, 2, or 3. Saturated fatty acid has no double bonds. They're fully hydrogenated. Maximum number of hydrogen atoms. I'm not even going to show you the structures because I don't want to go there. Okay? Just believe what I'm saying. Okay? That's the difference. Now, so what we feed our dairy cows is pretty much the unsaturated fatty acids. And fatty acids have different carbon lengths. You know, some are long, some are short. A lot of those are 18 carbons long. Some of those will be saturated. Some of them will have 1 double bond, 2 double bonds, 3 double bonds. All 18 carbons long. PUF means polyunsaturated fatty acids, meaning they got double bonds. Okay? Now, normally, rumen bacteria can take those polyunsaturated fatty acids, those liquid fats, and saturate them, and in the case of C18, form stearic acid, which has no double bonds. It's hydrogenated. Why do rumen bacteria even bother doing that? You ever think about that? It's because polyunsaturated fatty acids are toxic to them. They say, we don't like you, and we're going to take care of you, and they add hydrogens to them. Okay, so they're not toxic anymore. Under normal situations, that's not a problem. But we can do things in our diets, we can screw up our diets, such that we can trigger an alternative biohydrogenation pathway, which is this pathway, and you get the formation of this trans 10 cis 12 CLA. Now, if I showed all of these metabolites up here, this screen would be so chock full, there would be 30 or 40 of them up here. I'm just showing you the primary ones. This one, if produced in the rumen, it's going to flow to the small intestine, be absorbed, the mammary gland will take it up, and it's going to depress milk fat. Wow. That's scary. This now has to get metabolized to this one to form the stearic acid. That's just fine. But this one will also depress milk fat. We want to keep our cows, the rumen in our cows, from taking these polyunsaturated fatty acids and going in this direction. That's what we're trying to do when we work with you as nutritionists, troubleshooting milk fat depression. How serious can milk fat depression or how serious can it be? Oh, we've seen 3.8, 4% butter fats go to 2.4, 2.8. Wow, almost overnight. Say, what is going on here? We did something in our feeding to cause that to happen. The cows didn't do that. We did that. Something we gave them. So what are some factors that affect this ruminal biohydrogenation of fatty acids in terms of going into this alternate pathways? Well, factors that cause low pH. That is an important one. Like too many fermentable carbohydrates, not enough buffer production because we don't have enough physically effective fiber in the diet. Feeding management and environmental or facility effects, such as inadequate mixing. We're feeding TMRs, but we just do a sloppy job of mixing, and some cows get really hot diets. Inconsistent dry matter. We don't bother with dry matter testing our forages, and if it rains on the forage, okay, we still just feed so many pounds. Well, you can't be jacking the rumen around like that, okay? You can't be jacking the rumen around like that, because once in a while it's going to come back and bite you with milk fat depression. Inconsistent feeding frequency, overstocking, meaning too many cows at the feed bug, not enough free stalls for the cows. Heat stress, the list just goes on and on. Some of these things will trigger a decrease in rumen pH. We got to be careful. How about altered silage fermentation profiles? Well, there's some evidence that could say that can cause it. Mycotoxins, we're all familiar with mycotoxins, elevated mold and yeast counts. That will definitely raise havoc with rumen fermentation and can cause milk fat depression. How about factors that increases the availability of linoleic acid, one of these polyunsaturated fatty acids? Well, amount, source, and type of fat, processing of beans. You know, if you're feeding typical forages and you decide, oh man, there's some really good deals here on wet corn gluten feed, on distillers grains, yada yada, and you start chucking that stuff at the cows, and you're not paying any attention to your intake of polyunsaturated fatty acids, hang on to your hat, because you could be shocked one day and all of a sudden milk fat depression sets in. Now you're scratching your head. Okay? Factors, then there's factors that slow the rate of normal biohydrogenation, such as feeding fish oils. Okay, fish oil is good for cardiovascular disease in us, but I don't really highly recommend it for dairy cows, especially if you want to feed a bunch of byproduct feeds. Okay? Ionophores, rumensin. And then factors that result in high passage rates. really high passage rates. Again, like not enough effective fiber. Well, these intermediates are being formed in the rumen, but because there's such a high rate of feed intake, they get washed out of the rumen before they get fully saturated to stearic acid, and they get into the bloodstream, goes to the mammary gland, milk fat depression. So we're walking a really fine line here on some of these things. So there's no single dietary factor that's responsible for milk fat depression. There's no single factor at all. But what's really neat is that regardless of which factor is involved, all of them are due to changes in rumen biohydrogenation. Meaning some of those polyunsaturated fatty acids go into this alternate pathway of biohydrogenation. So what are some of the key ones that will increase the amount of polyunsaturated fatty acids in our diet? Well, by feeding more plant oils or tallow. You're playing with fire. If you're feeding unconventional feeds, byproduct feeds, that you are not constantly monitoring how much fat is in those feeds. Might be cheap feed, but is it the most economical? Well, you've got to decide. Then there's a number of factors that cause those fatty acids to go in a different direction in terms of biohydrogenation. Fermentable carbohydrate intake is a big one. And that's why you want to go back and look at everything that Randy Shaver talked about this morning. And don't let yourself get outside of those optimum windows. And then we've got on this side the rumensin and fish oils. They, in and of themselves, will not cause milk fat depression. Seriously. I mean, what we call real milk fat depression. But you couple those with too much fermentable carbohydrate or too many plant oils and tallow, and they will cause milk fat depression. That's just the way it works. Any questions on fat? Because I want to get out of fat.
Right here.
Any questions on fat? Because I want to get out of fat.
Right here.
Yes.
I don't have a question on that, but I think as a whole here in our area, we're way up on butterfat protein this year.
That's excellent.
Explain that to me, though.
Yeah, no, that's good. And it's the same thing in Wisconsin. I mean, I'm shocked at some of these. I'm shocked at the number of herds that are going over 4%. I just.
Well, we're not over 4, but we're at 387 right now.
Well, no, that's really good. You're way above average there, right? 365 is the average for your area. Yeah, that's great. It's great. So something about carbohydrate nutrition there. I think very little of that has to do with anything on amino acid nutrition, although it can, and I'm going to talk about that. But it's pretty much going to be on the carbohydrate side, because if you're that high, you're not suffering from the classical cases of milk fat depression. Yeah. Oh, there's still a lot we don't know, but we're not going to get there, are we? If we just balance diets for non-structural carbohydrates and NDF and crude protein. If anybody can, I have a tough time calling myself a nutritionist, so that's all I balance for. The dairy producers here don't need me for that. Yeah.